in the White House yesterday. Rambling would be one way to put it. It was almost 2 hours. It was supposed to mark 1 year since the president's return to office. It was all over the place. The president speaking about his desire to acquire Greenland one way or another and his ongoing frustration with NATO.
How far are you willing to go to acquire Greenland?
You'll find out.
What happens to the tariff threat to Greenland if the Supreme Court comes out and rules against you on the tariffs? And
well, I'll have to use something else. I mean,
are
look,
you willing to use force?
you know, take a look at the word license. Take a look at other things. I mean, we have other alternatives. But what we're doing now is the best, the strongest, the fastest, the easiest, the least complicated.
A consequence of your determination to take control of Greenland is the ultimate breakup of the NATO alliance. Is that a price you're willing to pay?
You mean the breakup of it's very interesting.
The NATO alliance.
So I think something's going to happen that's going to be very good for everybody. I think that we will work something out where NATO is going to be very happy and where we're going to be very happy. But we need it for security purposes. We need it for national security and even world security. It's very important.
You said you're confident something's going to get worked out in Greenland, but Greenlanders have made it clear they don't want to be part of the U.S.
Well,
what gives the U.S. the right to take away that self-determination?
When I speak to them, I'm sure they'll be thrilled. You know, should have gotten the Nobel Prize for each war, but I don't say that. I saved millions and millions of people. And don't let anyone tell you that Norway doesn't control the shots, okay? It's in Norway. Norway controls the shots. They'll say, we have nothing to do with it. It's a joke. They've lost such prestige. I did more for NATO than any other person alive or dead. Nobody's done for NATO. And I think for the most part, they'll tell you that. I think you could ask the Secretary General about that, but he said it a lot. I've done more for NATO than anybody, and I see all this stuff, but NATO has to treat us fairly, too. The big fear I have with NATO is we spend tremendous amounts of money with NATO, and I know we'll come to their rescue, but I just really do question whether or not they'll come to ours.
Huh? Has he driven down to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum? That's in New York City, by the way. Because that points out that on September 12th, 2001, the day after the 9/11 attacks on America, NATO met in an emergency session. Now listen to this. For the first and only time in NATO's history.
Say it again.
NATO, for the first and only time in NATO's history, NATO invoked Article 5. That's this century. Invoked Article 5. All 18 of the United States allies in NATO stated they would support America's response to the attacks. And John Meacham, one NATO country after another NATO country after another NATO country sent troops to fight alongside the United States in Afghanistan. Again, so many things are said in these press conferences that have no connection to reality, but there are some that you would think some staff member would correct when they would hear him saying that behind the scenes, say, no, Mr. President, far from them not coming to our defense. In fact, the only time Article 5 has ever been invoked is when terrorists attacked American citizens on U.S. soil, and all of them came rushing to America's defense.
Yeah, and let's go back for a second about why NATO exists, just for a brief moment here. The deadliest war in human history had just ended. It had been driven by appetite, by ambition, by authoritarianism, by totalitarianism, by racial genocide, by ethnic genocide. It had been a global disaster. And President Truman and then General Eisenhower and presidents of both parties, all the way until 2017, stepped up and said, with the Europeans, we cannot have just fought the Second World War and then let a any kind of weakness or division invite a third world war. That's what NATO was about. It was to try, and it was a bipartisan thing, right? And I'm not saying that there was some, Valhalla of bipartisanship, and my God, only if it could be 1951 again, wouldn't everything be great? It'd be great if you looked like us, Joe. I mean, it would, white guys. So this is not nostalgic. This is not sentimental. That was when America was great, because America spent blood and treasure at the last possible moment, by the way, right? We if you ask people what's the greatest thing the United States ever did, I think most people would probably, they think about it, would say World War II, right? The defeat of Nazi Germany, right? Pretty high on the list. But we got into it at the last possible moment, and only after we were attacked, and then after Hitler declared war on us. But by God, once we were there, we, in some ways, NATO sanctified the sacrifice of so many Americans who stood against Nazi Germany in particular. And the threat had mutated to Soviet totalitarianism, and we stood in the breach for 40 years. And then we prevailed. The Berlin Wall comes down in 1989. The Soviet Union collapses in 1991. If we'd been sitting somewhere, even in 1981, and we had said, you know what, the Soviet Union is going to collapse without a single American troop being in an active forward position, people would have thought we were crazy. But the alliance prevailed, democratic capitalism prevailed, freedom prevailed. The man's instinct, humankind's instinct to be free. The point of that, NATO was the military manifestation of the insight that starts with the Declaration of Independence, and just for Mika, goes to the Glorious Revolution and back to Magna Carta, right? This instinct that there is liberty under law. That's what's at risk now, is when you take this, when you start saying, which they have done, that this is about the rule of the strong and not the rule of law, you get back to a state of nature. And people can say that's hyperbolic and, Morning Joe says Trump ending Magna Carta. Have at it. Because at some point, we have to say what we see. And that's what is unfolding before our eyes. And we need the Americans who are children of this sacrifice, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of people who fought that war, need to remember why NATO exists and why America matters and why the rule of law matters.
And David Rowe, John's right. Not only have people like Stephen Miller, the president himself, said this is about strength. This is about power. We've got the biggest guns, the strongest economy. We can do as we please. You now have the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, when he wasn't talking about people with 10 or 12 homes, mocking the Europeans in Davos, saying, oh, what are you going to do? Write a strongly worded letter? We're the United States of America. Do as we say. That is the posture that the president arrives in Davos with. And now that's why we see, and we'll play some sound in just a moment, these European leaders banding together with Canadian leaders and others and saying it's time for us to push back.